Hello, dear viewers. A very warm welcome to our channel. It's very good to have you here. In this video, we're going to have a look at the principle of operation of a manual transmission. There are multiple functions of this transmission gearbox. First, it will increase torque going to the wheel. As you can see, there are gears and gear ratios that are going to be used inside the transmission. This will reduce the engine speed coming from this side and then increase torque going to the wheels from this side. So by doing so, the transmission increases torque going to the wheel. That is one benefits of a transmission. It will supply different gear ratios and match different engine load and speed conditions. The transmission will allow the driver to change the speed by which the vehicle is being driven. So it will supply different gear ratios. As you can see, there are different gears with different gear ratios and different combinations. This will allow the vehicle to match the different loads it has. It has also a reverse function down there. There is a reverse gear that will allow the vehicle to be driven in reverse. And finally, the other advantage of this transmission is it will allow the engine to be run without moving the vehicle. This is when the transmission is kept in neutral. All the gears that are connected permanently to the engine will run, but the output shaft will remain motionless. This is the neutral function. Let's see, for example, when I turn it on, as you can see, now all the component gears that are connected to the engine are running, but the output shaft is not rotating. This is the neutral function, so it will allow the engine to run without moving the vehicle. This is another function of the transmission. When we look at the construction of this typical transmission, there are different gears that are used in here. There are different shafts. For example, right here we have the input shaft. This is the clutch. The clutch is connected to the input shaft. So the shaft that is bringing power to the transmission is called the input shaft. It has one gear on the other end. It has a spline that goes to the friction disc on the other side. So this is one shaft. And then the input shaft is constantly meshed to the counter shaft. This lower shaft is called the counter shaft. The counter shaft, or sometimes known as cluster gear shaft, because it has multiple gears, sometimes call it the cluster gear shaft. This is the counter shaft. And there is another shaft that is connected to the output that is called the main shaft or the output shaft. It starts somewhere around here and extends right way, and it goes to the transmission. It goes to the final propeller shaft and to the wheel. So this shaft is called the main shaft or the output shaft. And the final shaft is right there. There is an idler gear for reverse. There is an idler gear shaft. So these are some of the main shafts that are used inside the transmission. Namely, there are four shafts: the input shaft, the counter shaft, the main shaft or the output shaft, and the counter gear shaft. Now, as you can see, there are different gears with different size. Small gear on the counter shaft. When it is driving larger gear on the output shaft, this combination is called the low gear combination. When a smaller gear is driving a larger gear, as you can see, the smaller gear has to rotate multiple times in order to rotate this once. So the speed will be reduced, torque will be multiplied. This is low gear. This is the gear with the highest gear ratio. When a larger gear on the counter shaft drives a smaller gear on the output shaft, that is called a high gear. So this is how we name gears. Low gear is when a small gear on the counter shaft is driving a larger gear on the output shaft. High gear is when a large counter shaft gear is driving a smaller output shaft gear. The gears on the output shaft, when we rotate the output shaft, as you can see, the ones that are rotating with the output shaft are those that are constantly connected to the output shaft. For example, this shift mechanism, this gear, and the entire synchronizer assembly is connected to the output shaft. That is why it is rotating when I'm rotating the output shaft assembly. When rotating the output assembly, those components that are in constant mesh to the output shaft are rotating. For example, this shift mechanism and this shift mechanism, all the synchronizer assembly, they are connected to the output shaft. But the rest, they are not in constant mesh. For example, this gear and this gear, they are not rotating when the output shaft is moved. It means these are riding on a roller bearing that is supported by the output shaft. Same thing is true for this. It is not directly in contact with the output shaft. Rather, it is supported by bearing that is riding on the output shaft. That is why it is not rotating when the output shaft is made to move. When I move the output shaft, as you can see, when the output shaft is moved, these two gears are not moving. It means they are supported on a roller bearing. Now let's go to the different speeds on this manual transmission. Now when first gear is selected, when the smallest gear on the counter shaft is engaged to the largest gear on the output shaft, that will be first gear. Now by a small gear driving a large gear, we have reduced the engine speed, we have reduced speed by great value, and we have multiplied torque. So when gear number 1 is selected, this has to slide and engage in here. This is a sliding mesh type first gear. Now in order to engage, look what is happening. When the gear selector knob is activated, when the gear selector rod is activated, it will slide this and engage it into the first gear counter gear. Look. Now, because this has meshed to this, power will be taken from the counter shaft's smallest gear, and then power is delivered to the output shaft through the larger gear. This will be first gear. Look, this right now is first gear. As you can see, the clutch is supplying power through the input shaft to the counter shaft, and the counter shaft's smallest gear is driving a higher gear, a larger gear on the output shaft. This will be first gear. So when first gear power is, when it is powered, engine power will come from the input shaft to the counter, from the counter smallest gear to the output larger gear, and then it will go to the output shaft. So this is first gear. Now, for the second gear, just look at the counter shaft. The gear that is a little bit larger than the gear number 1 is this gear. So this is the counter shaft gear for gear number 2. The second speed gear will be selected when this synchronizer assembly, which is in constant mesh to the output shaft, slide over and connect this shift dog to this shaft. That will be second gear. In order to do that, this selector mechanism, this gear shifting mechanism, it has to be slided to that direction. Let's go ahead and do that. Now, first gear has been removed, gear is in neutral. Then further pushing this to this side will engage second gear. Look what is happening right here. This is second gear. Now power flow is from the input to the counter, from the counter second speed gear to the output second speed gear, and then it goes out to the output shaft. Now the vehicle is being driven by second gear. In order to engage third gear, this will be the counter shaft gear for third gear, and this will be the output shaft for third gear. In order to apply third gear, first it has to be placed in neutral. Bring it back to neutral. Now it is in neutral because the output shaft is not rotating, counter is still running. Then, when we bring this selector to this side, when we slide this selector to this side, that output synchronizer assembly, which is connected to the output shaft, can engage to this shift dog. It can engage to that shift dog, and then power can be taken off of this third speed gear. Let's go ahead and do that. Look. Now, because we have connected the output shaft to this gear, power is being taken from this gear, from input to counter shaft, from counter shaft third speed gear to the output shaft third speed gear. Now we have increased speed, we have reduced torque. Vehicle speed is being increased. And finally, fourth gear is a direct drive. Now it is in neutral. In order to engage fourth gear, this synchronizer assembly will be shifted to that direction, and that will engage the whole shift mechanism onto the input gear shifts. Let me show you that. If I slide this mechanism and engage the synchronizer assembly to this gear, power from the engine will be directly transferred to the output shaft, and that will engage fourth gear. So fourth gear is a direct drive. See what will happening when we select fourth gear. See, the whole synchronizer assembly have moved to that side, and it has engaged to the input shaft. That will directly transfer engine power with no gear reduction, which is gear ratio of 1 to 1. It will directly come to the output shaft. This is fourth gear. This is neutral. Now, whenever we are planning to select reverse gear, the reverse gear is selected by sliding an idler gear right back there to engage these two gears. When the idler gear that is going to be slided to this side rests partly on this counter shaft gear and partly into this output gear that will cause power flow from the counter shaft to the idler gear, from the idler gear to the output shaft. Now by inserting an idler gear between these two gears, we can change the direction of rotation. Let's go ahead and engage reverse gear. Reverse gear can be activated by simply sliding that gear, the gear that is rear, it can slide and engage between these two. I don't know if it is visible or not. Look. Now, an idler gear has been inserted between these two gears. Part of the idler gear is resting in here. Part of the idler teeth is resting in here. Now, that way the vehicle can be driven in reverse. Let's go ahead and activate power. See? Now, this gear mechanism is rotating in reverse direction to the others. Why? Because there is an idler gear that is transmitting power. Power from the input to the counter shaft, from the counter shaft first speed gear to the idler, from the idler to this output gear. Now, because we have introduced an idler gear between those two gears, direction of rotation has been changed. Vehicle is being driven in reverse direction. So this is how the manual transmission for this particular vehicle operates. Always remember, reverse gear is better shifted when the vehicle is stationary. Otherwise, because there is no synchronizer mechanism like the rest of the gears, that will cause gear clash. This is how a typical manual transmission operates. Engine power will be transferred to the transmission through the input shaft, and then the transmission will change the direction of rotation if it is on reverse, or it will change the speed, it will change the torque by using different gear combinations. This is how a manual transmission operates. From the transmission, it will go to the universal joints, it will go to the propeller shaft, it will go to the differential, and finally it will come to the drive wheel. See, if we follow the power flow will be like this. As you can see, from the propeller shaft, power is going to the differential, and then from the differential, it will be split to the left and right wheel. So this is simply a principle of operation of a 4-speed manual transmission. Dear viewers, that is all we have for you regarding the principle of operation of a 4-speed manual transmission. If you like what has been presented, please smash the like button. If you are new to this channel, don't forget to subscribe, turn on notification so that you will be the first to get notified whenever we come up with another video. Until then, stay safe.